Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the legal analysis of the new coronavirus regulations announced by the government, seemingly on the fly at the start of the week. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, if the Dominic Cummings affair taught us anything, it should be that there is a difference between the coronavirus rules given by the government, which are actually guidance, and the law, which must be obeyed on pain of fine or prosecution. And if you ask most people what is just a coronavirus rule from the government, which is guidance, which you can't be prosecuted for, and which is the actual law, what do you have and not to do, I'm going to suggest that probably over 99% of the population do not know what the law requires you to do. Now, the coronavirus regulations, which do set out our legal obligations, were not, I remind you, passed as legislation normally is. Normally, there's supposed to be a proposal, a bill, which will be debated, scrutinised by select committees, by MPs, debated in Parliament, and then there would be a vote. In fact, there'd be a whole series of votes, and then amendments and all the rest of it. There was none of that. There was no consideration by select committees, there was no debating, there was no voting, there were no amendments possible. The government used emergency powers to enact these laws. Now, that in itself is not an issue because it is an emergency, and the emergency rules, should be used for things like that. They had to act quickly, but the government, whenever they use emergency laws like this, runs the risk of enacting laws that don't actually do what you think they do, or they may do something extra that's completely unintended. Because laws are tricky things, they need expert scrutiny, and you may read one thing and infer the meaning. You can read, just like I could, a section in a piece of legislation. You might think it means something, but your interpretation may not be the same as someone who is, say, trained under the law, experienced in prosecutions, and learned in other laws that may impact on the new one in some way. So when the new regulations came out, I decided to wait for the legal analysis to begin before commentating myself. In other words, what do the legal experts think of this? And the first thing that came out almost immediately was that the new regulations now ban sex between two lovers that aren't livers, two lovers in the privacy of their own home, if they do not live in the same household. You're all right if you're a cohabiting couple, that's fine. But the interesting thing is what these legal experts are saying, so you're not allowed to do that, but you are allowed to have an orgy with people from multiple households in your garden, assuming, of course, other laws don't come into play, that the site is shielded from neighbours, I suppose. And it wasn't a joke as well. It wasn't a joke. It was a flippant look at it, but it was actually very serious. Legal commentators all agreed that this was the case. And I'm quite sure that this is a classic case of an emergency law passed by people who aren't legally trained. Dominic Cummings in theory is, but he's none too sharp. And it hasn't worked out how they imagined. And remember, even very experienced legal professionals could draft a law that actually, because you just don't think of a particular consequence of it, because that's the importance of not just having one legal mind on it, but as many as possible, for someone to be able to spot something that other people haven't. And it has to be unintended. There is no way in hell that Boris Johnson would intentionally outlaw sex, particularly with people outside of your own household. I mean, he stuffs himself as much as anyone doing that. But on a more serious note, the new regulations don't just ban sex, they ban any form of interaction between people of different households inside the home. Not that it's just homes, the regulation applies to all private places. But there are exceptions. Obviously, they've understood that there needs to be exceptions. If there were no exceptions for a start, it would be illegal for these schools to reopen. But that's a place of education is an exception. But the exceptions include work, they include schools, they include things for childcare for early years, things like that. So in reality, when you consider everything, it mostly applies to homes. But this is the problem with passing these regulations without any form of scrutiny. Yes, as I say, it may be understood that the government had to pass emergency laws more quickly than normal, when the coronavirus regulations first had to be brought out. But they had more time with these ones, because what they should have done was to have at least published their proposals and sought feedback, even if they weren't going to go through the normal parliamentary procedures, which at the moment there's no excuse not to. When you're enforcing the lockdown, absolutely you had to bring it out quickly. But even then, what they could have done was, right, they brought out the regulations, there may be some things wrong with them, then spend a few weeks in Parliament getting it looked at properly and fine-tuning it where things came up. But when it comes to changing the regulations to allow greater freedom, in other words, easing the lockdown, they had time to do that. They didn't have to rush that. They had time to do that. They absolutely had time to put their proposals before Parliament. And the particular section that was being analysed, that was the one most noteworthy, is section 7, if you want to sort of see that. And it's basically unenforceable, because it covers what you may or may not do with consenting people in your own home or their home. The police have basically already indicated that they won't be enforcing it. They've just looked at it and gone, no. Frankly, I don't know which regulations left the police can even try and enforce. It would be a complete waste of time. There's almost nothing they can do. I mean, we saw the crowds at the beaches, for example. You may look at those crowds at the beaches and go, oh, look at all those people breaking the rules. Yeah, breaking the rules. Nothing the police can do about it. Because, again, there's a difference between rules and the law. The regulations now, I don't even know why they bother to exist. And just to highlight the silliness of the regulation. So David Alan Green, who, if you followed some of my other videos you may have come across before, is a very, very good legal commentator, very much backed up by other top legal commentators in the profession, always worth following. He used the sex analogy himself for a slightly different purpose. So he noted that with these regulations, because work is an exception, you can hire a prostitute and have sex with them in your home, but not your lover. Unless, of course, you are cohabiting. But the point he was making is that it is a badly drafted law. That's the thing. And he drew a comparison with a similarly badly drafted law from the 19th century, which had devastating consequences because it unintentionally, and I have to emphasise that point, it was unintentional. This was news to me, by the way. I had to do a little bit of digging. It unintentionally banned homosexual activity for men. So the anti-gay laws that we had in the UK for generations were actually not intentional. Parliament didn't intend to pass those laws. It was an accident caused by a lack of legal scrutiny, which took 80 years before we had a Parliament that turned around and gone, this is stupid, we need to get rid of this now. And the point is that it is incredibly easy to unintentionally remove our freedoms when you don't appreciate the benefits of scrutiny when it comes to legislation. Yes, the government had to act quickly at the start, but they should have used normal parliamentary procedures and certainly public scrutiny to make sure that not only the original regulations but later amendments were fit for purpose. Because some of the oddities in these regulations and clearly unintended consequences were spotted immediately, because as soon as they became public, because then you've opened it out to hundreds, even thousands of legal minds who all have the experience to be able to pronounce on this. But the government didn't do that. And so now the only legal way to have sex with someone outside of your household is to pay for it or to go dogging. Except I think there might be another law interfering with that one. But there it is. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.